Jacob Hitchcock, Hour 3. Alright, that was to set the mood. Tune in, turn on, drop out was a phrase coined by Timothy Leary, a psychologist in the 1960s and a leader of the counterculture movement in the 1960s. Turn on meant to look within yourself and become sensitive to the various consciousnesses that coexist within every human being. Tune in meant to interact harmoniously with the world around you, and drop out meant to abandon regular society. Now, Timothy Leary wrote this thinking he was being original, but really these same ideas were expressed almost 50 years previous in the novel Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. In the novel, many elements found in Siddhartha were also found in the 60s counterculture movement. So first, we'll explore a little bit about Hesse's background and a little bit about the background of the counterculture movement, and then we'll examine specific passages from Siddhartha that express the same ideas that were shared by the hippies of the counterculture movement. Okay, Hermann Hesse. Hermann Hesse was born in Germany. His parents were both missionaries, meaning that while he was a child, he got to travel many places around the world, including India, which he later based many of his novels off of. His grandfather influenced Hesse a lot. His grandfather was a philosopher, a doctor of philosophy, and he got Hesse interested in both the East and philosophy, which are prevalent in many of his works. In 1911, Hesse traveled to India, and he lived there for a year among the people. In addition to that, after he went to India, he served in World War I, and then he started suffering severe bouts of psychosis. So he moved to the Swiss Alps and lived the rest of his days in seclusion writing novels. Alright, now the counterculture movement. The counterculture movement was it was born in the 1960s, and it was a rejection of the social norms of the 1950s. And it was mainly started by the Vietnam War, and the Vietnam War, the continuing plight of women's rights, and racial struggles, racial tensions between the various races during the 1960s. The main point of it was that they wanted to reject the 50s culture, so they were all about love. They rejected the conservatism of the 60s and created the New Left. They supported love and free speech and all these things that are generally seen as more liberal ideas now politically. The people who composed the counterculture movement were known as hippies, and they were generally upper middle class, white, college-educated people. As you can see from this picture, most of them are white. If you want a taste of what a hippie would look like, take what I look like and do the exact opposite of it. They did many things that were seen as out of the ordinary at the time, including lots of drug use, mainly for enlightenment, spiritual, mental, or otherwise. And they also practiced something known as free love, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Also during the counterculture movement, there was a mass movement of people from various places to really two specific cities, and that is New York and San Francisco. And these people fell on these cities in the hundreds of thousands, creating their own community. And the ones who didn't go to the cities went and formed communes, which were basically little towns where they coexisted with each other in order to have a sustainable lifestyle. The hippies did various things like the Woodstock Music Festival, very famous. They protested a lot. They protested the war in Vietnam. They protested racial tensions. They protested basically everything that the people in power were for. They were against the people in power, or as they called them, the man. So that's just a little bit about the hippie subculture. Alright, so moving on, we'll talk about my first point in Siddhartha. So Siddhartha gave his clothes to a poor Brahmin on the road and only retained his loincloth and earth-colored unstitched cloak. He only ate once a day and never cooked food. He fasted 14 days. He fasted 28 days. The flesh disappeared from his legs and cheeks. Strange dreams were reflected in his enlarged eyes. The nails grew long on his thin fingers, and a dry, bristly beard appeared on his chin. His glance became icy when he encounters women. His lips curled with contempt when he passed by through a town of well-dressed people. He saw businessmen trading, princes going on the hunt, mourners weeping over their dead, prostitutes offering themselves, doctors attending the sick, priests deciding the day for sowing, lovers making love, mothers soothing their children, and all were not worth a passing glance. Everything lied, stank of lies. They were an illusion of sense, happiness, and beauty. All were doomed to decay. The world was bitter. Life was pain. A major theme throughout the novel Siddhartha was the dissatisfaction with life and the dissatisfaction of where we are as people. Siddhartha expresses that here when he talks about going through town and staring at well-dressed people with an icy look. He was born into, while not fabulous wealth, he was born into the Brahmin caste, and he could have gone on to be an excellent Brahmin, an excellent priest. But he was dissatisfied with that life, so he chose to leave it. Then he became a samana, and he quickly mastered their techniques for how they thought they could achieve enlightenment. But he too was dissatisfied with that. And then he moved on to become a merchant, where he made lots of money and had a nice house and a garden by the river. But he too was dissatisfied by that. In the 1960s, the counterculture movement really developed because these people were dissatisfied with the way things were going in both their country, socially and politically. They were dissatisfied by the fact that in the 1960s there were still racial tensions in America. They were dissatisfied by the fact that drug use or recreational drug use and sex was still seen as taboo. Siddhartha and the hippies of the counterculture movement really had a lot in common when it came to being dissatisfied with their life. And if we look at a few of these, he saw businessmen trading, princes going on the hunt, etc., etc. What Hesse is showing us here is that Siddhartha is dissatisfied with those who are trying to live their life the way that society deems that it should be lived. The hippies were the same way. They were dissatisfied, and they looked at people with contempt when they saw them going about their lives in a way that was, in the normal way. They wanted to change that. So both Siddhartha and the hippies share the common theme of being dissatisfied with their life. A motif throughout the novel of Siddhartha is that of love. Love for Kamala and love for his son. So he visited the beautiful Kamala regularly, learned the art of love in which, more than anything else, giving and taking became one. Siddhartha loved Kamala. He loved her in both the physical way and he loved her in the emotional way. Siddhartha also loved his son in the emotional way. In the counterculture movement of the 1960s, free love was something that they tried to promote. Free love does not mean having lots of sex and having lots of sexual partners. Rather, it means to get rid of the traditional institution of marriage and just love each other without having to show that you have a piece of paper for it. Kamala and Siddhartha do just that. They love each other. Their love is pure and beautiful, but they never get married, and they are showing this motif of love, and the hippies showed the same motif during the counterculture movement, because they were all about love, whether it be the Summer of Love, 1967, or basically any Beatles song. You can really just pick any of them, and it's probably about love. So both the hippies of the counterculture movement and Siddhartha share the common motif of love. Spiritual enlightenment was another major theme of Siddhartha, and so there is one thing that is clear where the instruction does not contain. It does not contain the secret of what the illustrious one himself experienced. He alone, among hundreds of thousands. This is what I thought and realized when I heard your teachings. This is why I am going out on my own. This is why I am going on my way. Not to seek another doctrine, for I know there is none, but to leave all doctrines and all teachers to reach my goal alone, or die. This passage is Siddhartha telling Gautama, the Buddha, that he wants to become enlightened. He wishes to become enlightened, but he will seek out his own path to become enlightened. He is going to seek out enlightenment. The counterculture movement, in the same way, worked to seek out enlightenment. They rejected the ways to enlightenment that the old society had given them, such as, making a lot of money, going to church on Sundays, stuff like that. And instead, they decided, we're going to do our own thing, whether it be taking LSD to have a spiritual experience, or even rejecting traditional Western religions in favor of Buddhism or Hinduism or Taoism. During the book, Siddhartha realizes that the paths of others, that you can't walk following the paths of others to reach enlightenment simply doesn't work, and you must forge your own paths for that to work. And that's also what the counterculture movement did during the 1960s. They did something that had never been done in America before. They rejected what they saw as a stale institution to create their own so they could achieve enlightenment, because enlightenment was one of the main causes of the counterculture movement. So, after looking at some passages from Siddhartha and analyzing them, and also looking at the history of the counterculture movement and a little bit of background information about Hesse, it's clear to see that the counterculture movement and Siddhartha share a lot of relevant points, even though Siddhartha was written 50 years prior to the counterculture movement even starting. I think that if Siddhartha was here during the 1960s, he would have been the biggest hippie out of them all. I think that he would have been going to Woodstock and he would be just having a blast. But I think that if Siddhartha were here today, he would look at hippiedom and see that it has been sold out now. Things that were seen as taboo back then, such as being a Buddhist, being a Buddhist or doing drugs or having sex before getting married, are all seen as commonplace now. In fact, I'm sure a few of you in this very classroom have done all these things. So, I think that Siddhartha, if he were here today, would tell us to tune in, turn on, and drop out. Thank you.
Great. Jake, you have a lot of faith in your classmates. I got a question for you. Do you know, you said Hesse was in World War I. He was a soldier?
No, he was not a soldier. He served in a hospital because he was not fit for duty.
Because was it mental problems?
Yeah, it was mental problems. He was not fit for duty, so he served in a prisoner of war hospital.
So did he struggle his whole life with mental health issues?
And it didn't really come out until after he divorced his first wife.
I see. That's really interesting. So he was in the hospitals. He probably saw some of the. Did you say in World War I he worked in a hospital?
Yeah, he tried to join the Imperial Army, but they wouldn't let him in because of his psychosis problems. So they let him work in a prisoner of war hospital.
I see. Yeah, I just wondered because we're studying that in my other class, and a lot of art emerged from World War I because of the trauma of that period. Do you have any idea how the book was received? I mean, I know from experience when I was young, this book was really popular in America. Do you have any idea if it was well received in Germany when it came out?
When it came out, I don't believe it was very well received. It did sell copies, but I don't think it was well received as it was during the 1960s, especially in America. It was very well received in America. In Germany, I know that from talking to a German foreign exchange student last year that he had to read this in school, in class. However, I don't think when it first came out it was as popular as, even in the 1960s, there were hippies everywhere, including Germany, so I don't think it really reached its popularity until the 1960s everywhere.
Yeah, it's very unusual subject matter probably for that time period. All right, thank you very much.